Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Walsh. Thank you so much for joining us. And today, it's the last day of the year, last day of 2021. So what better thing to do than go through some of the year in review, talk about it, react to it, process it, and also it couldn't be a year in review show without looking at the year ahead. We'll take a look at some of the biggest moments of 2021, some of the 10 worst Americans who really distinguished themselves, anywhere from Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer to the, interchangeably richest man in the world, Elon Musk. Also, who might strike in 2022? We're not talking about evil countries or any kind of dangerous thing like that. We're talking about labor action, folks. Hundreds of big contracts will be up, and we are going to take a look at which ones of those you should be looking out for in 2022. And also, in a hopeful note, we'll take a look at left-wing forces all across the world and how they're regaining their ground, especially in Latin America, with big wins from Honduras to Peru to Chile and exciting elections in Brazil next year. All of that, I am happy to say, we will be discussing today with James Stanley. James, thank you so much for joining us, and want to welcome you back to the show after a long 2021. And first of all, let's just say, how was your year? How did you react to this year?
Well, I'll say it was a very eventful year overall. I'd say it was probably almost as eventful, or actually I'd argue even a little more eventful than our previous year that we had just ended, 2020. Yeah. Wow. I mean, 2021 was a pivotal year for many individuals, politically, socially, and economically, in many parts of our country and world, for that matter. But I think that this year was a very eventful year, to say the least.
Yeah, I think probably the best thing to do is I have a little bit of a compilation of some of the biggest stories of the year, and I think we should start there. And no better place to start than the sixth day of this year, that everybody will probably know exactly what I'm talking about, with hundreds prosecuted after an attempted insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. Really kind of crazy to imagine. Like, that just seems so long ago, the pace of how things move. Even in the post-Trump Sleepy Joe era, things are still moving very fast. Like, to me, that seems a long time ago. James, now a few days on, or more than a few days on, a few months on from that moment, how do you think that the January 6th Capitol riots will affect our future politics?
Well, I think it was a pivotal moment for our country, in the sense that I think that it really showed us right there in front of our faces how there are... Yeah, so I think it was a very pivotal year with the January 6th riots. I think it showed us many of the extreme individuals and party figures in our country. I think that the biggest thing that January 6th will have coming in the future now, I think that it really empowered many individuals who are more extreme, potentially in the Republican Party, and even parties that are, individuals who are not a part of the Republican Party, to possibly get involved in the political process more. I mean, we see individuals like Paul Gosar, who, he's been in the House for many years. He's been openly very conservative. He was always part of the Freedom Caucus, that type of individual. But I'd argue ever since January 6th, and even honestly after Trump really got elected, that was really the beginning stones of his more shift to the right. But after January 6th, I think many individuals saw that, well, this, horrible event happened, and, technically many of the individuals who were part of the planning process for it have since, they haven't been called in. I know that this committee, the January 6th Select Committee, is potentially looking at eyeing, interviews of sorts with some congressional leaders and individuals. But that committee is going to be gone come the end of next year, not end of next year, early following year, 2023, most presumably when the Republicans take the House in 2022. Yeah. But I think that the biggest thing that January 6th really showed for our country is, I think that it was a pivotal point for where our country might be potentially not necessarily shifting, but bringing more individuals into our political process, which I'm not saying, is a great thing in the sense of bringing, rather crazy individuals like Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, those type of individuals, Madison Cawthorn as well, those type of individuals who, are there pretty much more for the political theater, it seems, more so than actually being a representative at times. But I think that overall, January 6th was a really pivotal point in our country's divisions. I think that it really kind of showed the true divisions that this country has and the utter craziness that some of the comments that the last president had stated after he lost the election.
Yeah, that really was probably because obviously that is the whole impetus for that, just that kind of questioning of the elections at a very, very basic level. That is something that, in kind of an open way, I mean, I personally, and I don't know where you fall on this, I would definitely say that elections have not always been, throughout our history, they don't always have a perfect record of integrity. If you look at just like the shenanigans and things that happened with the Supreme Court as recently as 2000, elections have been tampered with, and strange things have happened before, but never in this kind of openly so just chaotic and just crazy way. I mean, my personal so with that being said, do you see this kind of questioning of elections as a continued threat for the future in 2022, 2024? Because looking at the political grounds at the moment, I think the biggest concern for Democrats right now is not that they will the next election will be stolen from them, but they're just going to lose it outright.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I was going to hit on this earlier, but I think that you really get onto it pretty quickly there. And I do agree with you that in the future, I think that individuals will kind of look at it and say, well, he got away with saying the election was stolen, so why can't I? I mean, if the Democrats are going to be using that as in use any party, Republican or Democrat, but I mean, quite frankly, if the Democrats do use that, since they kind of, I mean, they didn't use the argument of it being stolen, but they did point fingers at individuals who, quite frankly, had nothing to do with the party's horrible losses in 2020. But I do think that there'll be, blame.
And in 2016, you had Russia and all that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Russia was another one. I mean, these are they're distractions away from, the real truth, which is that the Democrat Party has consistently, at least for many elections now, has run candidates that are, well, Hillary Clinton, I think, was probably one of the worst that we've ever run on the ticket, to be quite honest. But I mean, it's just a distraction away from the fact that the candidates on the ballots, for many individuals may not be appealing. It's all this, it's all this elitist hypocrisy from the party leaders of, kind of in some sense choosing, their party's nominee. I mean, we saw that in 2016 pretty openly after the primary with all the corroboration between the DNC and Hillary Clinton's campaign. There was most certainly corroboration in the 2020 primary with the, pushing out of Klobuchar and Buttigieg, but Warren staying in the race. Obviously I'm not going to make any conspiracy theories here, but I do believe that there was some corroboration of sorts in that primary as well. But going back to your question about if, individuals will be using the argument of stolen elections more after January 6th, I think that individuals probably will start to use it a bit more. I think that it will only be used in circumstances where, potentially individuals can look at tight margins. The margins that we saw in 2020 weren't exactly tight like we saw in 2000, for example, with Florida being roughly 500 vote difference. But
yeah, I think that was a big part of it, why they were able to do it so successfully in 2000 as opposed to 2020.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. I think 2000 was an interesting year compared to 2020 in the sense that Al Gore, who actually, he was overlooking the Electoral College. He had a lot of power. He didn't recuse himself or anything like that. I don't think no one was really expecting him to. But the thing is that 2000, I think, was a pivotal year for this argument, in my honesty, because when we look at what happened in Florida with Jeb Bush and the clear corroboration between him and his brother, the Republican candidate George W. Bush, there was, again, I'm not going to go into conspiracy theories here, but there definitely was some sort of corroboration with the rushing of recounts, canceling recounts. And, pretty much the biggest thing there is the rushing that was, put upon the pressuring of election officials in Palm Beach County and all these other more blue-leaning counties in South Florida that was put upon them by Jeb Bush at the time. But I do think that this election argument probably will be used again. I wouldn't be surprised if it's used again. But I think that the biggest argument that I'm starting to notice really more so is pointing of fingers. Even within the Republican Party, interestingly enough, now they're attacking, as they say, rhinos, Republicans in name only. It's quite interesting, actually. It's almost like the complete opposite of the Democrat Party. It's like the more center-right Democrats are attacking the more left-wing Democrats, and the more right-wing Republicans are attacking the more center-right, tilting right-wing Republicans, which I find quite interesting. It's a little bit of a different ball game it seems going on in that party with the attacking. But I think that that's probably one of the biggest ones we're going to see. But I would not be surprised at all if we see any type of argument being thrown out by a candidate who loses an election that election was potentially stolen.
Yeah, I would definitely say that as well. Once it's the genie's kind of out of the bottle, it's kind of hard to put it back in. But I personally am going to say that in the future, in terms of for most elections, will probably go very much kind of unchallenged, or like the winners will most likely get into office, as we saw with Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential election. But also with the investigation, one of the biggest, I don't know where you fall on this, but one of the biggest things that has been for me quite interesting is that, a question that, to the best of my knowledge, the January 6th committee has not been very good at answering thus far, which is where and why do we have all these kind of these FBI agents being associated with this, and how did this riot happen? Why was there so little security if there were all these unindicted co-conspirators who had very much been like they're just pretty much the prevalence of the feds and the Proud Boys and these kind of right-wing groups leading up to January 6th really makes it hard for me to believe that they didn't know about this coming. And if they didn't know about this coming, and they were it could have really been easily stopped by proper security outside the Capitol, why wasn't there proper security? Why wasn't it stopped? That is probably my biggest question when it comes to January 6th, and something I'd like to know. But, to my knowledge, January 6th committee, Liz Cheney, not interested. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I'm quite disappointed in most of the actions of that committee. I mean, I think, to be honest with you, I'll just be prudent here. I think that committee is a little bit more so, it seems more political theater optics than actually looking at the facts and getting to the questions at hand. I think the question that you ask is the question I also ask, but I think many individuals are very concerned about the actions that took place on that day and are kind of a little bit confused at times about why nothing was done, more protection was put upon the Capitol. And I do agree that the committee should be asking that question. I also do agree that they're not asking that question nearly enough. It seems more that they're trying to get interviews with individuals who clearly won't sit down for an interview. Look, they're having to put all these contempt, these charges out against people like Mark Meadows. They did it as well, I believe, against Mike Flynn, if I'm correct. Look, they're not going to answer you. They're not going to sit down for an interview. So I don't really see the reason to be wasting your time there, which is kind of where I've sort of made a little bit of a conclusion that's more for optics. But, I think the biggest reason why, to answer your question a little bit about why there was enough protection, for my personal opinion, at least a little bit, I think the main reason why there wasn't a lot of protection on January 6th was potentially because it seemed like it was an orchestrated effort amongst Trump administration officials and Trump himself to have that rally. I don't necessarily know if they had the plan to, go into the Capitol building. He definitely did, entice them to do that in his speech when he said, we're going to walk down to the Capitol and we're going to show them,
Definitely, yeah,
what we're talking about. I should kind of take that back. I think that his actions, by especially saying that, let's go down to the Capitol and show them what we want. I think that's kind of definitely hinting at let's go in the Capitol and show them what we want, because no one's outside the Capitol. All the politicians are inside the building, getting ready to vote. Actually, I think at the time they were already starting to vote on some of the Electoral College. Some of the challenges they were stalled with. I believe they were on the, if I'm correct, I think they were stalled on one of the challenges. I think it might have been not Pennsylvania. I forgot. Was it Arizona? One of the states. Because it was interesting because James Lankford was giving a speech, and then that's when they started to give they started to push individuals out of the Senate. At least the House, I think, was dismissed a little bit earlier than the Senate for some reason. The House was attacked. I believe they came in close to the House chambers and they did the Senate chambers. But the security on that day was, most of us saw the videos that day. It looked like you're at like a carnival. You have like the metal fences along there, like not the fence, like those fences you could pick up. I forgot the name. They're not really fences. They're just like barriers, I'll say. And, you had these cops that, I didn't see any of them really holding guns. They just had like batons. Some of them had pepper spray. Yeah. But this is like, are we at a carnival or are we at like the Capitol right now? It's like, I couldn't tell any difference when I saw the cops there. And later on, obviously, when it seemed to get more serious and individuals starting to get into the Capitol, it seemed like the Capitol Police was starting to mobilize in a little bit more of a serious manner per se. I mean, I would still argue that most of the Capitol Police there sadly weren't mobilized in a strong enough manner. I mean, in my opinion, they should have been mobilized the first second that they were there, because there are many rallies that have occurred in the Capitol region and at the Capitol Hill that have not been violent but have had presence of heavily armed police. I mean, if you're going to have that for example, a Black Lives Matter rally that was held at the Capitol many months prior, before the election, it was like June, July, then why won't you have that prepared for January 6th? Because I do agree with you that they knew about it. I mean, this was planned months ahead. I mean, they even admitted it. There were videos that were put out. Obviously, I saw them after the events, but they were put out on Facebook. Scott Pressler was openly saying, come down to the Capitol, get ready, we're going to have buses. I mean, he was saying this in December. A couple of weeks before the January 6th riots actually ended up happening. And, I mean, if we're all about surveilling our citizens, which I know people in this government say that we don't continue to do that, but I tend to not believe them for any day of the week, then, I mean, I'm not in support of surveilling our citizens, but I'm saying that we definitely have surveillance in this country, and they most certainly saw those videos being sent down on Facebook and all these other, means of social media that they used. It was mostly Facebook, though, interestingly enough, but people knew about it. And, I'm not really 100% sure why we didn't have a lot of protection. I believe maybe potentially Trump had said, oh, we don't need it. There's just going to be a small rally, etc. But at the same time, I'm not going to come to conclusions, that I can't, back up with any type of facts.
Trump definitely didn't seem like he wanted the National Guard by all accounts, but I don't think, in terms of Capitol Police, and especially the FBI and, knowing about this ahead of time, I don't think he has too many levers of control about that. But, all very interesting stuff. Just 2 weeks later, Kamala Harris was sworn in as the first Black, South Asian, and female vice president. And, Joe Biden obviously being sworn in as the president as well, in a very kind of historic moment, obviously. What are your thoughts, James, about Kamala Harris's record as vice president 1 year in, pretty much?
I think out of this, if I give her out of 10, I'd probably give her probably a 2 out of 10. I don't see her anywhere. She's never in the news. I don't really see her doing too much. I mean, she gives these speeches and she's too choreographed for me. She reminds me very much of like a Hillary light politician. I mean, she says that she supported progressive policies in the Senate. Yeah, I mean, you can say a lot of things, but they don't go far if you don't actually put them to action. And, it's clear that she just was speaking, again, in a choreographed manner, even as a senator. And so nothing really changed, for my opinion, on her from when she was a senator to vice president. But, I mean, overall, what has she gotten done? That's the question I have to ask, because, I would have to think here for a long time to think about what she got done, because to be quite honest, I mean, look, I'll be honest here. Vice presidents usually don't have a large amount of power, but when we see her, doing, various visits to other countries, especially, that horrendous visit she did not too long ago, saying, don't come. I mean, I believe she was in a Central American country, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I believe El Salvador, possibly. I don't know.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. But that was like the pivotal moment, I think, where, I mean, that was just it for me. I mean, it's like, did we elect a new president to be the same or the, different? Maybe because it was just, look, even though Pence never really said that, Trump most certainly said many things that hinted at the idea of don't come, stay away, especially with his actions and rules against the asylum. You have to seek asylum in a country before you seek asylum in America. If you're coming from Panama, you have to seek asylum in, Guatemala or Mexico before you come to America. Yeah. I mean, there were many actions that were taken in the past administration that definitely connected to what Kamala Harris said, which is don't come. I mean, so overall, though, I'm not happy with her at all.
Yeah, I definitely think that she was definitely kind of put, most of the stories, and I think, definitely the Biden White House kind of has some role in giving Harris, and you may be surprised, people, to kind of hear me defend Kamala Harris on this, but I would definitely say she has not been given the best roles by Vice President Biden, but I do think she is just, the pretty much the opportunity she's had, she has very much like with the the Don't Come incident and some definitely some other kind of visits and kind of high profile situations that probably did not go exactly the way she would have wanted, and then just a bunch of kind of leaking from her and her staff about the kind of funny paradox of it is like you'll see stories about how all stories with people or Kamala Harris's staff saying Joe Biden doesn't like me, he's not giving me all these kind of opportunities and stuff, which in most presidential administrations that will happen at least once or twice, and another thing is, then you'll hear all the kind of liberal political operatives being like, "Oh, it doesn't give it. No one gives Kamala a fair chance in the media," but then a lot of that is just those negative stories come from a lot of times. If you look at it, sources close to the vice president. So, it'd be interesting to see, because she's being hoisted up as the future of the Democratic Party, which is along with Pete Buttigieg, which I'll say, good luck with that. Also, another quick story here. Tom Brady won his 7th Super Bowl as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defeated the Kansas City Chiefs. Man, really, to me, representing just the, inability to get old. Really incredible situation. I'm sure, billionaires like, Peter Thiel or whatever would want a little bit of what he's having, to stay alive forever. And just anti-aging potion or whatever he's on. Also, flood-prone homeowners could see major rate hikes in FEMA flood insurance changes, a new study finds. So that was a big story that caused a little bit of concern this year, especially with the climate crisis looming in a very horrific way. Another climate crisis story, an unprecedented winter storm hitting southern U.S., especially in the Texas situation. Memorably, this is the time where Ted Cruz got caught going to Cancun as a bunch of people in his state were without power, unable to go to school, all that stuff, and just the state government just functionally unable to mobilize and fix this problem for an embarrassingly long period of time. And to me, for all this kind of, backstabbing and kind of, bleep talking that conservatives would do of states like California, which, great example of, neoliberalism kind of gone amok, in my opinion, and this kind of identitarian, wokish politics going over making material changes. You can't really be too cocky when your government fundamentally fails in probably one of the most basic tasks you can do, which is kind of protecting your own people when a little bit of ice comes around. If that was in New York, pretty much nothing would change.
Yeah, no, I agree. Look, I think I've said this many times. I think this country, I think, is really surrounded upon the idea of really survival of the fittest. That FEMA rule, I heard about it the other day, actually, funny enough, and I immediately said to myself, what are they doing? Obviously, I know what they're doing. They're bowing down to the private flood insurance companies here, and they don't want to give a lot of money out to individuals because they want to try to entice individuals to try to go and buy a private flood insurance so they don't have to rely upon FEMA for pretty much, insurance aid and help after a natural disaster. We saw that disaster.
You saw with just the story I read above that is, flood insurance rate hikes going up. So,
yeah, I'm not surprised at all. Look, this country, the issue with this country is we let corporations have way too much power over the citizens, and we see that exactly with that rate hike. We saw with the rate hike, interestingly enough, a couple months ago, down in Florida, Ron DeSantis got rid of. There was a mandatory rule after Hurricane Andrew, which is a horrible hurricane that hit Florida, I believe in 2006, if I'm correct, maybe earlier than that. I completely forgot the year. Many Florida homes were not built in a strong enough manner, so their roofs were literally sliced off, pretty much because of how the swift and fast the wind was during that hurricane. And after that hurricane, the current governor, I don't remember him at all. If it was 2006, it would have been Jeb Bush, but if it was prior to that, it would have been a different governor. But they put a rule in place that required private home insurance companies to cover roof damage in Florida after that hurricane, because many individuals who had home insurance found out that their plan did not cover it, and they were, it was pretty much a big thing, and etc. That was up for a recall, and interestingly enough, it was actually one of the legislator budgets got rid of it, and it was signed into law by DeSantis. And in that budget, it got rid of the rules requiring private home insurance companies to cover roof damage. I mean, there are many other places. I mean, we say in California as well. California, there was an instance where home insurance companies wouldn't have to, they would only be capped. I believe that they didn't have to give out funds that were more than $10,000 damages after an earthquake. I'm thinking to myself here, California is like one of the earthquake capitals in this country. And I mean, that doesn't make any sense at all. But again, it's all about going back to the connection of, corporations have a way too much wielding power in our political process, of our political system, to be quite honest. And I think, the reason why we see these type of rules going in place and rules being taken away and rate hikes occurring without any type of, regulation is because we really don't believe in regulation, and we don't believe in, addressing the corruption and actually is in some circumstances corroboration with private insurance companies and politicians. But I mean, it really connects back to the overall theme that corporations have too much power in this country, which is upsetting. And I hope it changes one day in this country. But, for now, I guess we have to deal with it, which is upsetting.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And another situation was millions of Americans received the third round of stimulus checks amid a pandemic. This was kind of more kind of infuriating and kind of crazy stories for me, because it was like, you get the checks, but running on $2,000 checks, but all of a sudden, when you get in, it's $1,400 plus $600 equals $2,000. This kind of very much Democrat. You couldn't get, if you're very much more traditionally Democrat, just like, and what I said is kind of what I mean, but also not really. And, Americans just got to figure it out. Like that to me was just kind of set the tone. This 1,400 plus 600 equals 200, the American Rescue Plan pass, because of course, Build Back Better coming just down the pike, anytime soon, was that very much set the tone for the Biden administration, in my opinion.
No, I agree. I mean, I think that was actually, I do agree with that a lot, because we actually saw in that bill, especially the power that was given to Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. We saw there was a capping on, I believe, if I'm correct, there was a capping on the stimulus check that was lowered. It was originally, I believe, if I'm correct, I think it was at $150,000 combined income, and then Joe Manchin, said, I'm not going to vote for unless it's 115 or 120,000. Then there was a cap as well on the child tax credit we saw that was put into that bill. There was a pretty big cap with income-based that, again, Joe Manchin wanted. We also saw in that bill that the minimum wage wasn't put in. Again, I mean, the parliamentarian said that they couldn't be put in, but I mean, I don't think many people realize, or at least Democrats know this, but they try to hide it, is that, the vice president could come in and, go against the parliamentarian's recommendation, which is also hinting at the fact of why I'm not really a big fan of Kamala Harris, because she hasn't done any of that. She didn't do that on immigration reform. She didn't do it on the $15 minimum wage, and she probably won't do it on anything else that the parliamentarian will say no.
All those big campaign promises. I think, now that we're on it, I think it's good to run through them kind of quickly. Just because there is a great article, shout out to John Schwartz in The Intercept about this, talking about it's true that the Democrats hold the Senate with the slimmest possible margins, but they just kind of had no plan, no real kind of strategy for getting this passed, other than just, pretty much show Joe Manchin. And also, around this time, though, when they were first passing the American Rescue Plan, they made the critical kind of Josh Gottheimer corporate-backed decision to split up the American Rescue Plan, which is the initial stimulus relief. With the infrastructure. They made the decision to split up the Build Back Better kind of social spending in a separate bill that would be a lot easier to kill with that initial bipartisan infrastructure bill to work on, and for Joe Manchin to get passed and also kind of significantly watered down. So then once they did that, they could turn around and kill the bigger Build Back Better bill. They didn't come up with a plan to really get any kind of thing actually passed. They did not use any kind of executive orders or, such as canceling $10,000 a person in student debt like Biden promised, make marijuana effectively legal, and Biden's lack of action on that has even frustrated some Republicans, forcing drug companies to lower prices, as Democrats have reportedly supported for 30 years. He did not use the executive power for that. And I really think that is just Joe Biden with almost like a very, I'm going to use the word, confused ability to understand Congress and to understand the levers of power that he supposedly ran on understanding so well. Like, if there was any, like, the whole reason in the primaries we were supposed to be picking Bernie Sanders over Joe, or Biden over Bernie, was because he would have the ability to get Joe Manchin in a room and get something done. And he can't even get a bad thing done, it looks like. It's just getting nothing done here on this Build Back Better bill, and just, refusing to use the power of the presidency. So, also, another big thing they missed out on, protecting the vote. They failed to even pass H.R. They couldn't pass H.R. 1. They couldn't pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Amendment or the Freedom to Vote Act. They didn't kill the filibuster. They did not get those people the full $2,000 checks. Didn't raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And there has been, with the Build Back Better agenda on life support, no climate action either. The House has passed a bill to protect abortion, but it has pretty much stand no chance in the Senate. They've failed to kind of protect the right to abortion. That's one of the biggest things they ran on. Did not pass the PRO Act. They did not make the child tax credit expansion permanent. So pretty much allowing them to only run on how they eradicated child poverty or whatever they were saying for about a year. Passing the PRO Act, pretty much breaking all the big promises to organized labor, especially with the $15 minimum wage, which was the one thing that Biden promised Bernie when he dropped out. Also, this has been something they're working on, getting free masks and COVID tests to everyone. They did not make Stephen Breyer retire. They did not, do any of the change U.S. foreign policy. Or no, to be fair, well, it's been a bit of a mixed record on that. Biden has pumped the brakes on the U.S. use of drones, and he managed to withdraw from Afghanistan, something 3 previous presidents couldn't bring themselves to do. But beyond that, his foreign policy trundles onward to very predictable paths. He's spoken nice words about ending the Saudi war on Yemen with little follow-up in reality. A lot of that stuff still going on. Remarkably, he did not move to immediately rejoin the Iran nuclear deal, which is a huge, huge deal. And, his foreign policy, especially on, anything, pretty much everything other than Afghanistan, and drones, bears a lot of similarities to Donald Trump's policy. So, let's see what else we have here. Saving millions of untold Afghans from starvation, which is really kind of a scary situation going on right now. Thanks to a drought, plus U.S. sanctions, plus a halt too much of the international aid after the Taliban takeover, tens of millions of Afghans are facing potentially life-threatening hunger this winter. And aid organizations say it's very possible that more people could die if this stuff goes untreated for an extended period of time than over the course of the direct causes of the invasion. So yeah, just to take a look at the Democrats' kind of first year in government there, I think it is very important. I know that's a lot there, James, but any thoughts you want to say on any of that?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'll say is the thing you brought up about who people were choosing between Biden and Bernie. I do agree with that. I mean, look, he can't even bring Joe Manchin into a room and keep him keeping the honest promises that Manchin supposedly had made Biden. I think it was a mistake. The second I knew that bill, the Build Back Better and the bipartisan infrastructure bill were separated, I knew that Build Back Better was dead. And, the main reason why I believe Build Back Better really was, it was mainly because of Josh Gottheimer and the SALT caucus, Tom Suozzi, all these nuts.
Yep.
I mean, we see now Manchin saying he would vote for Build Back Better without SALT. I mean, it's just that, look.
And also the best part is, we saw Sinema and Manchin, sorry to interrupt, but like Sinema and Manchin of trading off excuses, like Manchin being like, oh, I'd love to vote for the bill with a significant corporate tax hike, but Sinema would just turn around and be like, I will not support any corporate tax hike. And, almost like they're kind of trading things off here and constantly changing their positions, moving the goalpost 6 ways to Sunday to make sure that, what is in their both of their unique shared interests happen, just not happened, So it was definitely kind of an interesting situation there.
I agree. I mean, we see that. I mean, yeah, speaking of changing sides, I mean, Manchin now is saying he will vote for the bill without SALT. I think that, I agree, though, with what you're saying about him and Kirsten Sinema going back and forth. He's just trying to do a political theater right now. It's a recipe for disaster because, yeah, it passed the House already, but the Senate will – I mean, it'll have to go back to the House if the Senate does any changes to the bill, especially say Josh Gottheim or, the center-right Democrats that claim to be moderate when they're really not, or as I say, corporatist Democrats, really the correct phrase for them. They won't vote for the bill because they're all about SALT. They're all about giving tax cuts to their wealthy constituents in their wealthy districts, even though they claim for it to be a middle-class tax cut, which, yeah, middle class can use it, but the wide majority of individuals who use it are the wealthy because they have tax advisors who make it aware that they have that tax cut readily available to them. And, I mean, giving trust into Manchin was an egregious mistake on anyone. I mean, giving a trust to a man who couldn't even, vote for anything that the center-right politician that was Obama, okay, he couldn't even vote for many of the bills that Obama put forward. I mean, how are we going to give any trust to this man to be voting for anything like a child tax credit? I mean, he couldn't even vote for common sense gun legislation in 2013 when Obama had put that up. I mean, there's just things that Manchin did in his past that makes me question why anyone gave him any trust. I mean, does Joe Biden want his own policies? Does he want them destroyed or does he want them passed? It's a question I've honestly put out there because Biden put a lot of trust into Manchin. And yeah, I understand, look, they're best friends, as they always say. But at the same time, people are going to put their political ambitions first before, supposed friendship that Biden and Manchin have that, I don't really believe it, but whatever. That's
I think also, not to let, Biden, I think, certainly made a big mistake on that. And, he released all those statements about, how burned he was, which, I mean, with, I, as, someone who isn't able to legally purchase alcohol, was able to detect that Joe Manchin would never support this bill over someone like Joe Biden, who spent 40 plus years in the Senate and ran on how well he understands the Senate, and people like Joe Manchin. Like I think either he's really dumb or he thinks we're all really dumb. And I think also you cannot be. You have to really, as much as we can call out Joe Biden here, you can't not pay attention to what the Progressive Caucus did and made a huge mistake other than those 6 people in terms of voting to pass that bipartisan infrastructure bill on Joe Biden's word. He'd be able to kind of swing Joe Manchin around, and Pramila Jayapal, Ro Khanna, all those people who were so instrumental in getting pushing it up to this point, just suddenly when the going gets tough, just folding like a house of cards right away. So I just didn't want to overlook that there.
I do agree. I mean, the Progressive Caucus, I mean, they voted, I believe, if I'm correct, there was a specific, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Most of the Progressive Caucus voted for that bill. I'm not too certain. I believe Pramila Jayapal, actually, did she vote for the infrastructure bill, or am I going crazy?
Yeah, she did vote for the bipartisan infrastructure bill, yeah.
Wow, yeah, that speaks volumes. I mean, I understand, I do understand where she's trying to get at, but at the same time, look, I mean, it gets back to the point of like, how can someone give so much trust in Joe Manchin? I mean, his track record on trust is one that is like, I mean, it's non-existent. I don't even know if he knows what trust even means. I mean, the man said he would vote for Obamacare's public option. Then he teamed up with Joe Lieberman when Lieberman was going against the public option. I mean, it was a whole mess. Yeah, Manchin ended up voting for Obamacare, which is now really just a private, subsidies for private insurance. But the whole past of Joe Manchin getting so much trust and, owing trust in some manner to us is a track record that I don't know how anyone would trust because, I mean, it's been clear that through his past, he says things and he flips and flops. It's like a whole thing with him. He can't stay on one track because the money drives his track, it seems, But, overall, I'll say Biden's legislative achievements have not been as ambitious as he said they were going to be. I mean, his promises weren't really even as ambitious as he, said they were. I mean, yeah, the $15 minimum wage is a nice thing to do, but at the same time, I mean, how many years how many years late are we from doing this? I mean, we've heard Democrats promise this for years. I mean, I believe, if I'm correct, didn't Obama even mention it in 2015, 2016 that, if I remember he went to a rally for Hillary and he said that she's going to make a $15 minimum wage.
Really?
Well, you're president right now. I think the first person to bring that up was
Bernie, if I'm not correct, as a politician.
Bernie did, yeah. Bernie did bring it up, and this was after the primary, when Hillary was trying to appeal to the Bernie people, trying to say I'm going to do $15 minimum wage. But her plan was $15 minimum wage over I think 6 or 7 years. It was like it was not really an immediate $15 minimum wage. Actually, none of the $15 minimum wage plans are immediate, but her plan was like really not anything special. I mean, over 6 or 7 years to do minimum wage. I mean, yeah, I understand it taking some time, but at the same time, she wasn't being serious about it. She was just trying to
Yeah.
appeal to burn people
Yeah.
and but overall, I think Biden really look. Biden, I think, really kind of lied to the people. He made promises that he couldn't keep, and he's just a typical Democrat and typical politician, to be quite honest with you. But am I surprised that he made promises and didn't keep them? No, not at all. I mean, look, he tried to seemed like he tried to be a little bit more. I don't really like to use this term for Biden, but he seemed like he tried to be a little more liberal than Hillary Clinton in 2016. I mean, did it work out for him? I mean, he won by tight margins in pretty much every state. I mean, he did end up winning, so I guess it sort of worked for him in some sense. But at the same time, look, if you're going to make promises, you got to keep them, and that's not going to bode well for him. Will bode well for Democrats next year in the election, or for him in roughly 2 years from now when he's up on the ballot again in 2024, if he even runs, which I hope he doesn't. But
yeah, that's going to be very interesting and definitely an interesting future situation here. But yeah, we'll kind of scroll now down the timeline of our list here. It's a constant story for many years now in America, which is mass shootings. It's a gunman killed 10 in Colorado, and the second mass shooting in a week in Boulder, Colorado, earlier in the year. Evergreen, the Evergreen ship, the Ever Given. I remember that was kind of a fun story, I guess, for a few days. Was when the skyscraper-sized ship blocked the Suez Canal, pretty much went sideways in the Suez Canal and just held up pretty much all of global shipping traffic for a little bit there. Also, we have, next story pretty much down the line, gunman killing 8 co-workers at an Indianapolis FedEx facility. That was very, very much, so much more of the same. 19-year-old former employee came to the FedEx facility and opened fire in the building. Here's a pretty significant story. A jury found former police officer Derek Chauvin guilty on all counts of the May 2020 murder of George Floyd. He was guilty of second and third degree murder and second degree manslaughter. So a very, very kind of significant step. And I think probably, if you look at the Black Lives Matter movement, one of the biggest real changes is that a lot of this stuff is actually, like, especially really the eye-opening case for me was the Kim Potter case, with mistaken a gun for a taser and her actually getting acquitted. Like, so I could imagine her in a pre-George Floyd era being able to just keep her job. So I think that is really kind of representative of a big change and obviously a very good thing to see, Chauvin's conviction.
Yeah, I do agree, and I do agree with that. That after George Floyd, there has been a good shift, I'll argue, in our judicial system against keeping cops accountable for their actions. I was actually a little. I'm not going to be. I'm going to be honest here. I was a little surprised by that conviction with that female cop, but I was very pleased to see it.
Yeah.
Because we've seen arguments like that used before. Oh, I thought it was a taser. Oh, I didn't mean to do it. And then they get maybe she would have gotten. I was expecting a small sentence, maybe like a 6 or 12-month sentence in a jail of sorts. But I mean, it looks like she's going to be getting a pretty large sentence of sorts. I mean, she got charged with a pretty big crime there, and I'm happy to see it, though. I mean, I think that it was a nice shift. It's a shift that should have happened years ago. It's a shift that I believe we should never have seen. It should have always just been, the common trend. But, the sad thing is that our judicial system in the past, I guess, wasn't as, fair as it is now in some sense. I don't think the judicial system overall is fair in every regard. But it's nice to see that, these actions are being taken against individuals who, did an action that was incorrect and are being held up to the fullest extent of the law.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to move down here. Big moment for the vaccination program. By April 19th, COVID-19 vaccines were available to every American over 16 who wanted a shot. Pretty big moment there. And I think really with Omicron, that is a big reason why it's going to be very interesting, because we're seeing this kind of Omicron situation come. And it really, right now, does, with the power of our vaccines and our boosters and all that, does seem to be really making things better. So that is a good thing that we got those vaccinations out this year.
I do agree. I mean, the vaccines they've done very well, I'd say. I know many individuals say, oh, well, I still can get COVID from the vaccine. And well, yes, I mean that was always something I think most people, well, should have known at least. It was said by many individuals that you could still get COVID. I think the thing that's really quite not really shocking, but very good to see from these vaccines is that individuals who get COVID, we see a lower hospitalization rate, which, to be quite honest, is one of the most important things for this country right now. I mean, our hospitals have been overrun for years. I mean, our healthcare system here is rather deplorable for what we pay for it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I also would say though that the vaccines they've done very well for what we've used them for this last year and a half. I mean, protect us against COVID. Obviously, individuals can, there are still breakthrough cases that are occurring, and some individuals who are vaccinated are getting, bad side effects, but the wide majority of them are getting, rather mild side effects, which is very good to see that, the efficacy of these vaccines are actually, relatively proven to be accurately, as they stated in the past, from these various pharmaceutical companies and, medical researchers after the fact. I mean, the pharmaceutical companies I didn't really trust 100%. The researchers after the fact, like, with these Oxford research oriented thing, efficacy rates of the specific vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna, or Johnson & Johnson. It was interesting to see how the efficacy was actually as high as many of these pharmaceutical companies were quoting. But I'm pleased so far with it. I think that the vaccine rollout could have been a little bit better, even with Biden, to be quite honest with you. I think now it seems to be a bit better. I mean, these at-home testing kits, that's a smart idea, but I'm not really 100% of a fan of the fact that I remember Biden had mentioned that you would receive free care if you got COVID, and now it seems that it's only for the individuals who don't have to go to the hospital. So I guess that was another broken promise that Biden had made. I don't know if you remember that promise he made on the campaign trail, that if you get COVID, you won't have to pay anything because it.
Yeah. That was a big thing, and then we saw like the CDC releasing, hospital stays can be expensive, that kind of thing. Very much especially for COVID, not the best thing that you would want to see there for sure. But yeah, I think it's interesting to watch this kind of like return to normalcy. Like once you get vaccinated, you should really kind of continue on with your life, cut down times with isolation and things like that. And once you kind of get those boosters, but really putting a lot of emphasis on the vaccines and the boosters, and really sticking to that message that actually is going to incentivize people to get a vaccine, which is once you get the vaccine, you don't have to really worry about COVID and can pretty much go on with your life.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, I think that overall, I think the push to get individuals with booster shots has been pretty good. I think that the biggest issue that we're starting to notice in this country is that people are like, well, I just got 2 shots. I suppose it was fully vaccinated. Why do I have to go get a third one now?
Yeah.
I think that, again, it goes back to the promises. I think people, more so politicians, and even some of the healthcare individuals were saying, get 2 shots and you're done. I don't think that was really the right thing to say because, that people are holding them to their word, which is not something bad to do per se. I mean, I remember many individuals were saying, you get these 2 shots, you're fully vaccinated. In my opinion, when I hear fully vaccinated, it almost sounds like you're kind of done. When you get fully vaccinated with chicken pox, you're done. I think that was a little bit of a, I think it was look, I think I understand why they did it. They were trying to push people to get the vaccine in the first place, but at the same time, making false promises it's been seen with the booster shot data that it's not really boding well per se for individuals who made that promise. I mean, now we're seeing booster shot rates going up a little bit, probably because of the Omicron variant, but overall it's not as good as it probably could have been if those promises weren't made in the past.
Yeah. Another kind of remarkable story was the crazy collapse of the Surfside condo in southern Florida, which really kind of shows you the very scary story. Like 2 other condos had to be evacuated. Just really kind of a show of just very much dysfunction in the regulatory state. The Town Record revealed a chronically strapped code compliance division responsible for working with an outdated, unorganized building department, just like the infrastructure there, to keep people safe, just fundamentally just really removed in that front over time. Another big story, Andrew Cuomo resigning this year after a report detailed sexual harassment claims. Really finally something, it really was a sexual harassment that brought him in, and obviously, as it should. But I think people also should not forget the horrific, just really just frankly awful demonic behavior of just selling out nursing home residents for the next for his campaign donors, in giving them immunity after they donated to his 2018 campaign. I mean, really just shows that he thought he would never get caught, and thank goodness he did.
Yeah, I mean, I was very surprised by his resignation. I was very pleased to see it. I mean, I was more so surprised because, I mean, look, Andrew Cuomo's been always about power and his time in office. I mean, he's always tried to make himself like the center man of everything. I mean, we see that especially now with, these abuse allegations that have since been, I mean, the AG's report was very damning, I'd say, for his overall character, but it wasn't really too surprising for me because, he was very, I mean, he looked at himself as a very powerful individual in front of the scene and behind the scenes. Behind the scenes was a whole different individual, but I am very happy to have seen that AG report made public. I'm pleased by the investigation, by it. I think overall this was a good thing to happen because Andrew probably, he was already going to run in 2022 and he probably would have won and he would have just continued his abuse. And I mean, the thing that's really alarming though is, I personally seen very little difference between Andrew Cuomo and Donald Trump in regards to after they were out of office. I mean, Andrew Cuomo is still trying to fight this report. He's, pushing these false claims with his lawyer, Rita Glavin, who's a corporate packed lawyer. She was a lawyer for George Bush. She's had a pretty corrupt past as a lawyer, to say the least. The Cuomo verse, or whatever they call the individuals who are enamored by Andrew Cuomo for some reason, they are pretty much similar to the Trump individuals. Like, instead of, obviously Andrew Cuomo didn't accuse the election of being stolen, but maybe Trump supporters still believe that the election was stolen, as do many Andrew Cuomo supporters, not in the sense of election is being stolen, but they believe that Andrew Cuomo is not guilty of any of these crimes. They think they're all fake and false. I always thought that towards the end of his time in office that he was very Trumpian in nature. I mean, even before that, his specific actions with, taxation and, policing were rather, they weren't really very good decisions in my personal opinion. I mean, this man didn't want to raise taxes on higher income earners, even though they were still leaving. I mean, he was arguing that if we raise taxes on them, they're going to leave the state. They were still leaving the state even without these heavy income taxes that we see in states like California, for example. And I mean, overall, Andrew Cuomo really, I never really cared for him as a governor, and I'm not really too surprised that people say he may run again. I don't think it's going to happen. I think that his reputation is really too destroyed for it to happen again. But I'm not going to argue against the fact that he still will have a big sway in the New York political sphere because he does hold $18 million, and he still, as we speak right here today, is still accepting donations on his political campaign website, which, he is a machine in our political system in New York and around the country, to be quite honest with you. I mean, he still is a pretty powerful figure, maybe not anymore in the DNC, but he was a powerful figure, at least in the Democratic Party back then. And, he definitely could sway, I'd argue, more statewide elections than, national elections per se. But, he's definitely not someone to turn a back completely on. I'm going to turn my back away from him. I never would have voted for him. I don't know if he turned my back away from him if he ever were to run from office, but I don't think people should not keep an eye on him for what he does with that large amount of funds that he has right now in his campaign bank.
Yeah, so Cuomo, very, very interesting political figure, still to be a threat in the future. Certainly possible, definitely not worth counting him out, I would say. Deadly explosions underscored the chaos as the United States finally, after 20 long years, this is the USA Today kind of headline there, definitely a lot of chaos there, and really some awful kind of decisions made in the midst of a good one there by Joe Biden. Probably the most egregious one for me was, as he kind of finally pulled out of Afghanistan, the situation, the way he handled it with those, that ISIS-K thing, definitely raised my eyebrows. But what really raised my eyebrows the most, even as he did pull out of Afghanistan, which was fundamentally a good and important thing to do, which I would like to give him credit for, like the really disgusting and just killing of the civilians, calling them ISIS, a family of 10, calling them ISIS fighters, and pretty much saying that 3 months later, Pentagon comes out with no one's going to be held accountable. just a very, very telling instance that, as things change, they stay the same in terms of our posture towards the Middle East and, just countries abroad and how we deal with them and how we handle ourselves on the world stage is super embarrassing moment to add up to so many with foreign policy in the United States.
I agree 100% with that. I mean, I think Joe Biden has really continued the trend of looking at the Middle East almost as more of he looks more at a threat, and he also seems to more so. I mean, his actions on the Afghanistan war, I'm a little bit pleased about. I didn't really particularly like what ended up happening after the fact. Now with all these individuals going, hungry, and Joe Biden has the pen at his hand. He can always get rid of these sanctions. He can also, get Congress. I mean, actually, he can't. It would be Congress more so to get rid of them. But he can definitely, rally Congress around doing it. Would he? Probably not. Because, again, getting back to the point of what you mentioned, that it's a continuation of our past Middle Eastern policy. It really is. I mean, Biden just kind of wanted to make a little bit of a difference between other past presidents by actually getting us out of the war, which I was supportive of getting out of that war many years, before this. We should have gone out of it years ago. I mean, Obama even promised it, or at least he hinted upon it, but he didn't do anything about it. I mean, Trump really, I honestly thought Trump was going to really get close to it. I mean, I didn't really hold a lot of trust in Trump, but he definitely did speak a lot about it in the later part of his presidency. But overall, I'll say Joe Biden really hasn't changed anything in regards to Middle Eastern policy overall. I mean, we've gotten rid of the drone strikes. Well, we still killed, that poor family. And with the drone that we hit it, that was the even worse thing about it. It's still the same type of thing. We do violence, we hide it, or we, send money over. And like, for example, with the situation with Saudi Arabia and Yemen, nothing has changed there. I believe we're still selling arms sales to them, if I'm correct. I don't believe that it was even repealed yet, even though Biden did mention that he would get that repealed. But, overall, I'm not really too surprised nor happy with the actions that have been taken by the Biden administration on Middle Eastern policy. I think that's it's too much of the past, and we need to focus on the future because the past actions have clearly not worked at all in that region.
Definitely agree with that. Another thing that happened this year, you may have been really familiarized with for the first time with the word supply chain, as we kind of saw these kind of empty shelves and kind of rebounding economy in uneven ways after the pandemic, as we saw kind of a wave come, more restrictions had to happen, goods were hard to produce in some areas. It's just a very kind of uncomfortable situation all around. Also, another kind of crazy story that happened this year, actor Alec Baldwin was rehearsing the scene for the movie The Rust with a revolver that he believed to be unloaded, but obviously it was not. A kind of very scary situation that could happen, but definitely not really tied to anything kind of broader politically. Another crazy situation that was quite scary and produced a lot of conspiracy theories about, satanic rituals was the Astroworld Fest in Houston, where I think up to 10 plus people and many more injured. 10 plus were killed and many more injured with this fire official. At the Travis Scott concert, they had a private medical team there, and it wasn't really coordinating with the fire. Just tons and tons of examples of irresponsible behavior, missed signs, things like that. In a very, very sad situation, and a really crazy shoot. It kind of passed a new barrier, I think, at the end of this year with the Michigan Oxford High School shooting, where we kind of saw the guy posting about it on social media, the parents seeming to be, almost okay with it, and the parents also getting arrested. Really awful situation. 4 students killed, 7 injured, and the teen suspect and the parents were charged in a really kind of sad, almost crossing the boundaries of that we have now parent-sponsored school shootings almost in America now. Very, very disturbing, to say the least. And in terms of more kind of climate crisis and things of that nature, a really horrific Kentucky tornado devastated in the winter that left victims in 5 states. It was just multiple tornadoes, actually, 30 tornadoes, killing at least 74 people in Kentucky, 16 in Illinois, in Tennessee, Missouri, and Arkansas. Late December 10th and 11th. The victims are still being accounted for days later. A really, really horrific situation there. And also probably, natural weather is one thing, but probably, another angle to this was that Amazon warehouse where people were told to keep working and died because of it, just producing horrific texts about how, like with the people in the Amazon warehouse saying, I love you, Amazon, I'll be home after the storm. And of course, they never came home. Just an awful situation, with Amazon and, trying to push labor, that kind of makes me think of the Bessemer situation and how they're getting new union election. But yeah, Amazon, definitely a big story. And, that kind of brought new light, I think, to the craziness of Amazon that so many people did already know about.
I agree with that. I mean, Amazon has, Amazon is now, I've even noticed more recently, they're really starting to pick up their PR a lot to try to, it's more so lies, it seems. They're trying to say like, oh, we all have minimum wage, we're giving free insurance, we give time off. I mean, it's a whole, it's pretty much corporate propaganda at its finest hour. That's really what it is. But, Amazon as a whole, I'll say that many individuals in the past sadly did actually have a pretty good outlook on Amazon in regards to labor. But, with these private contractors that they've hired for delivery, the overworking of their own workers, including private contractors as well, it's clear that Amazon is looking at profits more than actually looking at individuals as well. It's pretty much a corporate profit mill is what I've pretty much have considered Amazon with its actions. They have no regard whatsoever for their employees, besides their corporate employees. But I'd even argue some of them are even overworked as well, but more so the workers who actually are working and making Amazon, operate as Amazon, moving packages around. They're overworked way too much. They're not given benefits that they should be given. They're not given an adequate amount of time off. And I've even heard many instances where many Amazon employees are at work and can't even, use the restroom, can't take a lunch break for more than 10 minutes. It's just deplorable actions on Amazon's part that I'm happy to see that the light has been shined upon their actions, but I'm disappointed in the actions that have since been taken by Amazon, which is pretty much of corporate propaganda to lie, to deceive individuals into this idea that, no, Amazon is good. We give the minimum wage, we give insurance, we give all these benefits that in reality you don't give, and you never probably will give unless it's mandated, or obviously these workers unionize in some manner, which again will be hard because of the corporate propaganda in that regard with anti-union propaganda that Amazon had endorsed.
As we saw in Alabama most specifically. And as it turned out, I heard 6 people in the course of 2021 died in that plant, kind of setting up a very interesting second union election that's going to be happening I believe in 2022. But yeah. Speaking of which, we have a very, very exciting 2022 to look ahead for possibly much more kind of labor wins. We saw the Great Resignation this year. With the labor shortage panic was a big, big factor this year. Talking about how a lot of unions and a lot of people were able to win some pretty significant concessions. But we could look to see more of that next year. So, 200 large union contracts will expire between November 2021 and the end of 2022. These contracts cover 1.3 million workers, some of them in grocery, coalition of several food and commercial workers locals, plus one Teamster local in California, Washington, and Colorado are coordinating actions and demands on contracts for 1,000 grocery workers at Kroger and Albertsons, which will expire over the next several months. So that's going to be interesting. Also, 30,000 workers at Stop & Shop in New England will be having their contracts expire in February. They last struck in 2019 when the company tried to hike their health care costs, gut their pensions, and get rid of time and a half on Sundays. So it's going to be interesting to see how, if they will truly be treated as essential workers. We heard so much of that right before, they tried to do that right before the pandemic rolls around, essential workers. Will they be treated as such? The ILW, the longshoreman contract with the Pacific Maritime Association covering 22,000 dock workers in Washington, Oregon, and California expires on the 1st of July. which will be interesting to watch in 2022. So that, those negotiations will get started in earnest in the new year, most likely. A one-year extension expires on May 31st on a contract covering 4,000 Teamsters who transport new cars from factories and rail yards and auto dealerships. Also, Teamsters winning a much more kind of progressive ticket this year in their internal elections, which should lead to, hopefully, more aggressive union negotiations, challenging bigger companies and just pushing more and more, capitalizing off this economy, for example, Amazon. The Steelworkers Pattern Agreement covering 30,000 oil refinery and petrochemical plant workers expires on February 1st. Marathon Petroleum, the now number one U.S. refiner, will be the lead negotiator. Its agreement will set the pattern for 20 plants owned by 12 companies. So that's going to be interesting. Looking at Topeka, the agreement covering the Frito-Lay plant there, where workers struck last summer over 84-hour work weeks, expires in September. Also expiring in 2022 is the contract over at Frito-Lay in Vancouver, Washington, for the BCTGM, and also they had the Kellogg strike, which is incredibly which was tougher, I think, for labor there. But they did make some kind of incremental progress. Big expiring contracts are going with hospital workers, which would really be huge with the staff shortages they face. They're going to really need to see kind of a fundamental change in that industry to kind of keep their workers engaged in years to come. A 5-week strike this fall at another Buffalo hospital chain netted a major win on staffing ratios. Bloomberg says that large expiring contracts in the education sector will cover 268,000 workers. California local striking in 2019 will be expiring again in 2022, 34,000 teachers in LA and 3,000 in Oakland. And New York City's contract will expire in September. It's been a big year for higher ed labor. Contracts up in June include the 19,000 graduate employees at UC system and 16,000 faculty and campus workers at Rutgers in New Jersey. The contract has already expired for 29,000 members of the California Faculty Association. There's faculty, librarians, and counselors at the California State University system, and they are mid-battle at this point. And thousands of employees at the Frontier in California and Connecticut have been working without contracts since the fall. In California, 2,000 Frontier workers held 2 one-day unfair labor practices strikes already, and with a bigger deal could be ahead. And so the CWA Midwest contract with AT&T will also be expiring in April. So really pretty much, journalists and museum workers also will be fighting for the first contracts throughout 2022, which is going to be very, very interesting. Tons of, recognitions happening all over the place. Starbucks also is another one this year that, got a big union win. So a pretty interesting and bigger, good year for labor, but definitely something they could try and build on in 2022.
Yeah, no, I really do agree with that. I mean, labor, I think 2022, will be a very interesting year for labor. I think we'll see a lot of new contracts put in place, especially with Teamsters now having new leadership in place. I believe that it'll be very good for the workers who are part of the unions. I think it's always good to see unions having good contracts coming out. Those colleges that you mentioned, the UCs and Rutgers, those will be interesting to watch as well, because what we've seen more recently is even public universities, private universities have infamously been ones that have tried to get union contracts that are pretty much abysmal for the union employees. But public universities have kind of jumped onto that ship as well now, obviously for cost reasons, which is not correct in any regard. But it's interesting to see what happens there, especially with UC, which has taken a very tough line approach on spending, especially with salary base. I mean, UC professors and employees do make good money. I mean, that was mainly because of the last contract, in my opinion. But it'll be see what type of tactics they take or what type of agreement they end up coming out of it. Because the UCs and even Rutgers, I wouldn't be too surprised, but more specifically the UCs will probably try to get a cheap contract, one that doesn't involve a lot of spending, with coverage for insurance, etc., that the UCs will have to cover for their employees. But overall, 2022 will be an interesting year for union workers. I also would agree that those workers, part of the union for docks and shipping ports in the West Coast, will be interesting ones to watch, especially since with the supply chain issue, they've been working almost nonstop. I mean, I know Biden opened up He allowed for the ports to be open up 24/7 in California. So we'll see what happens with that contract, because these workers have been working nonstop, day in and day out to really get these cargo ships, offshore and have the products come on land as fast as possible. But overall, I think 2022 will be a very interesting year.
Yeah, like a lot of what we're seeing is like the essential workers who played such a big role in the pandemic. Their contracts are coming up. We're seeing this kind of happening more and more in all these various sectors that really kind of helped keep us afloat, really, in the pandemic. And now, now it's really kind of coming up to them to really get their money's worth. So it'll be interesting to see how their bosses will respond. Also, internationally, it's going to be a very exciting year in Latin America, and also was a very exciting year for left-wing politics. Latin America's political left is making a resurgence. We're looking at Honduras, just been the latest country. Actually, not the latest country. Chile's Gabriel Boric, Boric, I'm not entirely sure how you say that there, winning in a really kind of just, again, as I said at the time, the almost ideological successor to Salvador Allende, beating by literally the same margin too, which is kind of crazy. Pinochet, the ideological successor to Pinochet, son of Nazis, literally, Jose Antonio Cast. So that was a big win for them. But also Honduras was a country to vote out a long-serving right-wing government, most likely put in there by very coup methods brought on by Hillary, in no small part, funnily enough. So Xiomara Castro became the country's first female president a few months ago, winning the November election with a promise to pull Honduras out of the abyss of a narco dictatorship and corruption. Castro's husband, the former Honduran President Manuel Zelaya, was deposed in a U.S.-supported coup. Zelaya was part of the original Pink Tide, which pretty much saw leftist leaders in major countries kind of getting into power democratically all throughout, and that was challenged sometimes, to say the least. And these leaders were pretty much eager to leverage natural resource wealth in the name of reducing inequality and fostering social programs. Pretty much having control of their country and having control of their really economy for the first time for some of these countries ever. Castro's win, in a sense, pretty much heralds a broader political shift in a big way. Ecuador, though, there are some exceptions. They elected a conservative banker, Guillermo Lasso, but the trend is definitely in the right direction. 2021 also saw Pedro Castillo narrowly win the presidency in Peru. Coming out of nowhere, the former rural teacher pledged to better share the country's vast mineral wealth and take mining companies, more royalties from mining companies he is accused of plundering the Indian nation. And also, next year, we can look ahead to Brazil, a very, very big and interesting situation. What we will likely see is the current president, Jair Bolsonaro, against former left-wing president Luis Inácio Lula da Silva. The contest will offer voters in Latin America's most populous nation a very, very stark choice between someone who's kind of a solid, center-left politician who really did a lot of great things to the country, kind of bring it into almost the modern age economically, versus Jair Bolsonaro, who's just been taking the country back pretty much on coronavirus and on inequality, on Amazon, all that stuff. Been a very, very big deal. So, we're looking at a lot of that stuff. Daniel Ortega secured a fourth term in November in Nicaragua. And in Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro continued to be pretty embattled over there. So that is, but mostly what we're watching is, I believe, Colombia next year, and really the big one is going to be Brazil. All right, so that pretty much wraps up our show today. We're really getting a lot of different places. But before we go, James, what are you most looking forward to, would you say, in 2022?
Well, the biggest thing I'm looking forward to 2022, I have to argue, the Brazilian election is definitely one of them. I'm also very much looking forward to seeing what happens with the midterm elections in 2022. Most likely the Republicans will take the House, but, Elections in the U.S. are always interesting in some regard. We have a good chance at seeing some, rather liberal and progressive propositions put up in states. I know that are a couple of states already that are looking at propositions on their ballot for marijuana legalization, and as well as there are some states that are even looking at having Medicaid expansion again. I know Florida had a proposition, I believe that was on their ballot, but it got taken off because of specific wording, language that was not really neutral with their petition to get onto the ballot. But it'll be interesting, I think, proposition-wise, election-wise, in the U.S. and around the world in 2022. I think as well it's going to be interesting to see what happens if the Republicans take the House in 2022. I mean, I'm just curious to see what type of, Joe Biden we see. I think it'll be probably same old, same old. I think he'll probably try to say things, or we're going to make sure to get this done. And then, behind closed doors, it'll be, pretty much horrendous, quote unquote, bipartisan deals that'll be happening through these bills. Maybe nothing will happen, to be honest with you. But it'll be interesting to see, I think, overall, what happens in 2022 election-wise, but as well as with Biden administration and what happens with this Build Back Better Act, which supposedly is looking to be potentially brought back up for another potential vote in the Senate. But we'll see what happens there with that.
Yeah, definitely a lot of interesting things to look forward to. James, thank you so much for joining us. And we wish all of you a very, very happy New Year. We will be back, just like nothing ever happened, on Monday for another episode of Newsflash. But until then, have a wonderful New Year's Eve and wonderful New Year's Day. We will see you on Monday. And James, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.